It started with a flag. On the morning of June 21st, the world woke up to a quiet yet deafening signal, a simple image of the U.S. flag posted on Donald Trump's Truth Social account. Hours later, the news broke: America had launched a direct military strike on Iran. For the first time in history, the U.S. Air Force bombed 3 nuclear facilities inside Iranian territory: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. It was a shocking act of aggression, one that marked the most dangerous escalation in U.S.-Iran relations in decades. And yet, to many watching closely, this was not a surprise. It was the explosion after a long fuse had been lit. Just over a week earlier, on June 13th, Israel launched a surprise assault on Iran's infrastructure, reportedly with the green light from Washington. The strikes on June 21st weren't just an extension, they were a declaration. And when Trump took to the podium at the White House, flanked by Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he didn't call it war. He called it a spectacular military success. But what really lies behind these attacks? Was it truly about stopping a nuclear threat, or is there a deeper, darker motivation driving this war? Why did U.S. intelligence publicly admit just months ago that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon, and why was that statement suddenly reversed under political pressure? In this video, we're going to dissect the timeline, the lies, the legal implications, and the chilling historical parallels that point to something far bigger than a battle over uranium. This isn't just about Iran. This is about power, empire, and a dangerous precedent being set before our eyes. The road to war with Iran didn't begin overnight. It was paved with silence, deception, and a green light. On June 13, 2025, Israel launched a covert airstrike against Iranian infrastructure. According to multiple intelligence sources, this surprise assault was not only known to the United States but was actively endorsed by the Trump administration. Donald Trump had given Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explicit approval to proceed, setting into motion what would soon become an international crisis. Just 8 days later, on June 21st, the United States crossed a historic threshold. In a highly coordinated operation, American warplanes struck 3 of Iran's most critical nuclear facilities: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. These were not symbolic attacks. They were direct hits aimed at crippling Iran's nuclear capabilities. The White House quickly confirmed the operation, with Trump taking the stage to declare it a success. Behind him stood his new cabinet, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. These are not your average politicians. All 3 are vocal hawks who have long championed a more aggressive stance toward Iran. As Trump spoke, his rhetoric was chilling. He didn't describe the mission as a last resort or a reluctant step toward stability. He boasted, "Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated," he proclaimed. Moments later, on his social media platform Truth Social, Trump posted nothing more than a U.S. flag, just as he had done after the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani back in 2020. The message was clear: pride, not regret. But beneath the triumphalism lies a dangerous reality. This was the first time the U.S. had conducted direct airstrikes on Iranian soil. It marked a dramatic escalation that violates international law, undermines the United Nations Charter, and brazenly disregards Iran's national sovereignty. This wasn't a skirmish. It was a declaration of war. And Iran took note. Iranian officials quickly condemned the attack and promised retaliation. With over 40,000 U.S. troops stationed across the Middle East and a dense network of military bases in countries like Iraq, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia, the U.S. has painted targets across the region. The Iranian response is not a question of if, but when, and how far it will go. The United States airstrikes on Iran weren't just militarily provocative, they were legally indefensible. Under the United Nations Charter, the use of force against a sovereign nation is prohibited unless sanctioned by the UN Security Council or in direct self-defense. Neither condition was met. Iran had not attacked the United States. There was no emergency, no congressional declaration of war, and certainly no international consensus. Yet, the missiles flew, and the silence from Washington's allies was deafening. The bombing of Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan struck at the heart of Iran's infrastructure, not just symbolically but practically. These were sites under surveillance by international bodies like the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. And until recently, Iran was still cooperating with IAEA inspections, despite long-standing tensions. The attack has now jeopardized that fragile compliance, potentially dismantling years of diplomatic groundwork in a single night. But the most immediate consequence is regional instability. Iran has made it clear, retaliation is coming. With over 40,000 American troops scattered across the Middle East, the U.S. has effectively placed its military assets within reach of Iranian ballistic and drone capabilities. Countries such as Iraq, Syria, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain, hosts to American bases, are now unwilling participants in a conflict they did not provoke. Particularly vulnerable is Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, home to U.S. Central Command's forward headquarters. Bahrain, hosting the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, is another high-value target. These facilities represent more than military muscle, they symbolize American presence and hegemony in the region. And they are likely to be among Iran's first targets should conflict escalate. The geopolitical ripple effect doesn't stop at Iran's borders. The assault has put neighboring powers like Turkey and Egypt on high alert. Even regional rivals of Iran, such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE, understand the risks of being too closely associated with American actions. In Tehran's eyes, the region is complicit, and therefore vulnerable. In initiating this war, Trump hasn't just shattered norms of diplomacy, he's redrawn the rules of engagement for 21st-century warfare. What was once unthinkable, open conflict between the U.S. and Iran, is now underway. And as history has shown, these kinds of confrontations rarely stay contained. The foundation of Trump's justification for war with Iran was built on a lie exposed by his own intelligence agencies just months before the bombs fell. In March 2025, Tulsi Gabbard, then serving as Director of National Intelligence, testified before the U.S. Senate, Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Her statement was unequivocal. The intelligence community, IC, had assessed, once again, that Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei had not authorized the revival of a nuclear weapons program since it was suspended in 2003. There was no immediate threat. No uranium race. No ticking clock. But on June 21, mere hours after the U.S. airstrikes, Gabbard reversed herself. On Twitter, she posted a carefully worded statement suggesting her prior testimony had been taken out of context, and that Iran could soon possess the capabilities for a nuclear weapon. The shift was stark and suspicious. According to insiders, the Trump administration had pressured her to correct the record to support the narrative of preemptive self-defense. This tactic isn't new. In fact, it's painfully familiar. In 2002 and 2003, George W. Bush's administration made the same move, claiming Iraq had weapons of mass destruction to justify an illegal invasion. No such weapons were ever found, but the war devastated Iraq, killed hundreds of thousands, and destabilized the region for decades. Now, in 2025, Trump is recycling the exact same playbook. It's not just about manipulating intelligence, it's about manufacturing consent. Trump's administration didn't want a war they had to explain. They wanted a war they could sell. And Tulsi Gabbard, once seen as a maverick voice against interventionism, was now helping to package and promote the very narrative she once stood against. Her compliance wasn't just political, it was personal betrayal, to herself and to the truth. In war, the first casualty is always the truth. And in this case, the distortion of intelligence serves as a window into the broader strategy: justify the unjustifiable, demonize the enemy, and silence dissent. When intelligence is manipulated to fit political goals, democracy is compromised. And when a war is waged on false pretenses, the consequences are catastrophic, not just for the country being bombed, but for the integrity of the institutions back home. History doesn't just echo, it screams. And what's unfolding between the United States and Iran in 2025 bears eerie resemblance to a long line of past interventions, invasions, and irreversible blunders. Take Iraq in 1981. Israel bombed Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor under the pretext of preventing nuclear weapons development. Instead of stopping the program, it galvanized Iraq's efforts. Saddam Hussein funneled more money and resources into nuclear research, an ironic twist the West chose to ignore. That escalation would snowball into the Gulf War a decade later and ultimately culminate in the U.S. invasion in 2003. Libya offers an even darker lesson. In 2003, fearing U.S. aggression post-Iraq invasion, Muammar Gaddafi agreed to dismantle his nuclear weapons program in exchange for improved relations with the West. 8 years later, in 2011, NATO bombed Libya, overthrew Gaddafi, and plunged the country into chaos that persists to this day. The message was loud and clear to other nations: give up your deterrent, and you'll be destroyed. Iran has taken notes. And so has North Korea. In 2002, George W. Bush delivered his infamous "Axis of Evil" speech, lumping Iran, Iraq, and North Korea into a single category of rogue states. Just a year later, the U.S. invaded Iraq. North Korea, watching closely, withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2003 and began weaponizing. Today, it still exists as a sovereign state largely because of its nuclear arsenal. Proof that deterrence, not diplomacy, is what keeps the U.S. at bay. Iran has now reached the same conclusion. Prior to June 13, 2025, Iran was not developing nuclear weapons. But following the direct U.S. and Israeli attacks, that calculus is almost certain to change. When a nation is attacked without provocation, its leadership faces pressure not only to retaliate, but to ensure it can never be attacked again. And here's the terrifying part: if Iran chooses to go nuclear, others may follow. Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, regional powers with financial means and geopolitical ambitions, may now feel justified in starting or accelerating nuclear programs of their own. What was once a fragile regional balance is now a potential arms race, triggered by unilateral American aggression. The real danger of ignoring history isn't just repeating mistakes, it's creating outcomes far worse than the past ever warned us about. When bombs fall, profits rise. That's not a conspiracy, it's a pattern. And Donald Trump, a billionaire himself, understands this calculus better than most. One of the most revealing details of the June 21 attack on Iran wasn't military, it was financial. According to a report by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, Trump deliberately delayed the airstrikes until Saturday to avoid unsettling Wall Street. It wasn't about timing for strategic surprise. It was about market stability. Trump wanted to make sure the stock market wouldn't crash when it reopened on Monday. In other words, even while launching an illegal act of war, the interests of capital remained top priority. This revelation peels back the layers of what's truly driving U.S. foreign policy. It's not just ideology or national security, it's oligarchy. At the time of the strike, Trump's administration included 12 billionaires, all of whom were deeply embedded in industries that benefit from war, defense, energy, and private equity. These aren't just wealthy individuals. They're policy shapers. War is good business, and the business of war is booming. The military-industrial complex, long warned about by even conservative voices like President Dwight D. Eisenhower, now functions as a shadow government, funneling public funds into private hands through endless conflict. Every missile launched is a paycheck. Every base expanded is a dividend. And every war waged ensures the flow of contracts to companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing, whose stock prices often rise with every escalation. This dynamic makes peace not just undesirable, it's unprofitable. And so, policies are shaped not by diplomats or ethicists, but by executives and shareholders. Trump's focus on Wall Street's reaction is not an outlier, it's the standard operating procedure. The real constituents of modern presidents aren't voters, they're venture capitalists, hedge funds, and weapons manufacturers. Even the justification for war is tailored for economic purposes. National security threats are crafted to maintain military spending levels. The narrative of the nuclear threat from Iran isn't just political, it's a business model. Fear sells. And the product is war. In this light, the strike on Iran wasn't just about foreign policy. It was about securing the financial health of a system that survives on chaos. Trump may be the face of it, but behind him is a machinery built on war profiteering, and it's running smoothly. Trump stood at the White House podium with the confidence of a man who believed he had won something. Behind him were the flags, the generals, the applause. But what exactly was achieved? Iran's nuclear facilities were bombed, but Iran wasn't building nuclear weapons. Diplomacy was declared dead, but it was Trump who killed it. He called Iran the bully of the Middle East, yet it was the United States and Israel that launched surprise attacks. Then, with breathtaking hypocrisy, he demanded that Iran make peace, while threatening even greater strikes if it didn't surrender. Let's be clear, this wasn't about preventing war. It was about controlling the narrative, crushing resistance, and rewriting the rules of engagement. The true objective wasn't disarmament, it was dominance. What we're witnessing is not peace through strength, but instability through arrogance. The risk now isn't just regional conflict. It's a nuclear arms race, an economic blowback, and the collapse of trust in international law. Iran will retaliate, because it must. To remain passive would invite more attacks. And the longer this conflict festers, the more likely it becomes that diplomacy will no longer be an option. But there's another layer, trust. Why would Iran, or any country, return to negotiations with the United States after this? Trump admitted to luring Iranian diplomats into false talks while secretly planning their assassination. This isn't negotiation, it's entrapment. It's regime change in disguise. And that betrayal could haunt American diplomacy for decades. So where does that leave us? With over 90 million people in Iran, this isn't a war that can be contained. This is a crisis with global consequences. And as the world watches, one thing is certain, the truth must be louder than the propaganda. If this analysis helped you see through the fog of war, share it. Subscribe. Speak out. And in our next video, we'll dive deep into how U.S. sanctions paved the road to this moment, an invisible war that began long before the bombs dropped. I'm not a politician. I'm not an expert. I'm just an American, someone who wakes up, goes to work, takes care of family, and tries to stay informed. And yet, sitting in my living room, watching the news of the Iran bombings unfold, I felt something deep in my gut. This doesn't feel right. We've been down this road before. I remember Iraq. I remember the lies, the weapons of mass destruction that never existed, the soldiers who never came home, and the trillions of dollars spent while our schools, roads, and hospitals crumbled. And now here we are again, different country, same playbook. Trump says it's about peace. But bombing nuclear sites and threatening slaughter isn't peace, it's provocation. It's pushing a sovereign nation into a corner, then blaming them for fighting back. And what scares me most isn't just the violence. It's the feeling that my voice, and the voices of millions like me, don't matter. That decisions about war are made by billionaires and war-hungry politicians who will never see the consequences. But I believe we still have power. I believe truth matters. And I believe that real patriotism means holding your leaders accountable, not blindly following them into another endless war. I'm tired of being told that war is the only answer. It's not. We've seen what war brings, and we deserve better.